Hello, Julie.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. We're excited to share with you part 2.
We had such a good time talking the other day about the origin story of Brave Writer. I mean, Julie, I'm enjoying this conversation to pieces, and I hope it will be very fun for our listeners to get this walk through, because it's like a life unfolding and a business unfolding, but it's also this watching how a love of writing ripples out to affect like all these different aspects of your life. I was thinking about the first part of our conversation a lot and thinking about how, wow, you started from this place of enthusiasm and interest and curiosity. And you kept raising your hand for some new expression of it. And knowing that just being willing to enter into this new thing with the spirit of adventure grew into what it is now, I think is so exciting. And it's it's a source of inspiration and a great model, not just for us, but for our kids and for how we encourage our kids to just not try to achieve excellence at a thing before you do the thing and to put it out there in the world. Okay, so all of that is in my head as I thought over part 1 of this Brave Writer 25th anniversary conversation.
You know, what's so cool about what you just said is that I was realizing as I looked over everything we talked about, I didn't know that this kind of career could even exist when I graduated from college because the internet didn't exist. And I think sometimes we're so busy trying to help our kids figure out what their future is, but the future they're entering isn't here yet. And the opportunities and the job options that may end up being their best life may not even exist right now. Like they may not be able to discover them until they get there. And so I think it was really fun for me to listen and realize that this thing sort of evolved over time and it kept shape shifting to match opportunities, but I couldn't have planned it. It was the kind of thing where a door opened and I walked through it and I just sort of, fake it till you make it kind of thing. I mean, I knew I had some raw skills. I will tell you something funny because I was working in the field of music and songwriting, running these magazines and books, editing other people's writing. I thought I wanted to be a songwriter. I always loved singing and I had played piano as a kid. And so I took guitar lessons in my 30s and I started writing songs, lyrics and music together, which was just a great joy. As a kid, I used to compose piano songs. I composed something like 300 songs as a kid, none of them very good. They were just like the joy of my life. So I got to this point where I thought, well, maybe I can write lyrics and music together. And I remember making an appointment with one of the preeminent songwriters in the Vineyard at the time, a guy named Andy Park. Some of you will know him. And I played for him this song that I wrote. And one of the comments he made, I'll never forget. He said, "You won't really know if it's a song or a good song until you risk singing it in a small group and you see if they continue to sing it after you've left. Like if they find it to be interesting enough." And here's what he said about my actual songwriting. He said, well, the good news is it is a song. Some people write songs and they're not songs. You knew enough of how to structure it. He said, but I don't know that it's enough to inspire people to sing it. And you would have to find that out by using it, which was a gentle way of saying it is not inspiring enough for people to sing it. And here's what's really funny. Writing came so naturally to me that I never expected it to pay any bills. So I thought I had to go acquire a skill that I didn't currently have to try and have a career. So I was like, well, I have to learn how to write songs because that's how you're going to make money someday. And meanwhile, I was literally being paid to do the writing side of this music business, not the songwriting side. And it was like a moment of crystal clarity when I was about 36 or 37 when I realized, oh, wait a minute. It's okay for the thing you love to pay your bills. You don't have to feel like you're working to pay your bills. And that was a big breakthrough for me. I didn't have to be a songwriter. It was really fun to play the guitar. I fully enjoyed it, but it didn't become my career, and it never was going to be my career. So I just thought I'd throw that out there too, because sometimes we set this weird expectation to ourselves. And instead of like really leaning into the things that people keep asking us about, one of my best friends in college became a master organizer for businesses. And she could hardly live with me because she was constantly trying to organize me, which I defied. But like that was her natural talent. And it was all the way back to college. And then someday in her late 40s, early 50s, she's like, I could actually make money doing this. And now she does.
It reminds me of that story I told last week of the children's book author she was addressing a group of authors about how to put together a school presentation. And that's where she was like, you already know so much. You don't have to reach for so far. Get up and talk about what you know. Do what you already do.
Yes.
And that comes across. And Julie, you're reminding me also of this is really landing for me because I just finished reading Tara Moore's book. We're going to be interviewing her next week.
Yes.
Her book, Playing Big. And one of the things she talks about is how it's very common for women to feel like they do have to go out and acquire expertise in something, a credential, level up their skills before they can charge for it. And so that sort of pairing of that sense of like, oh, I need to go out and learn how to do, songwriting rather than use my innate writing skills.
Yes.
But also because the thing came easy to you, you sort of, there's an inclination to undervalue it.
Oh my gosh, 100%. I remember when I was doing ghostwriting, it came very naturally to me. No one trained me to be a ghostwriter. In fact, I always felt like I was taking my acting skills. Like, how do I get into the character of this person I'm writing on behalf of? So I would sit there and I would start imagining myself in his body, saying his words, and I would like get into character. And I thought, well, everyone must be good at this. And then they hired another woman because he had so much volume. They hired another woman so that two of us could be doing it, and she couldn't do it. And she was a writer also. And finally, she called me in a desperate fit. She's like, how do you do this? And I was like, oh, it's an innate skill. She doesn't have it. And I went over, and no matter what I did, I could not get her to understand what I was doing. So then all the work came back to me, and I just worked doubly hard and got more done. But it was really interesting. It's just what you said. When something sort of comes more naturally to you, it's very easy to undervalue it in the marketplace. You kind of think, well, I don't even deserve to be paid. It didn't take me anything. Something really interesting along those lines. When Brave Writer was about 10 years old, so 2010, I was going through a divorce, and that was a really difficult season to run a business, have kids in school, have some kids in college, and go through this major life transition. And at the time, up till that point, there had been two incomes in my family, right? There was mine and there was my husband's. But suddenly now there was just one, and Brave Writer had to do it all. And yet I was in this just awful state emotionally, and Brave Writer was like hanging on by a fingernail. And I remember saying to someone, they were saying, Julie, you work so hard at it. And I said, I really don't. I mean, I've only put in 20 hours a week or something. He's like, are you kidding? I think you put in more than 40 hours a week. Have you ever counted how many hours you're actually working? And I said, oh, I guess not. But like when I look at my day, I think it's about half time. Well, here's what I discovered. The only hours I was counting were the tasks I didn't like doing. So the hours I was counting were like going through a spreadsheet, answering a customer service email. Like those felt like work. But when I was writing blogs and curriculum and teaching classes, they weren't on my list of things that I was doing to earn money because I was enjoying them. And so in my mind, that wasn't the work part of my life. That was just the joy part. So anyway, at the time, I realized that's when I really had to like crank up on staff and kind of expand so that I could grow because I actually had maxed out my hours. I just wasn't counting all the hours.
Right. That is so funny to me. I always think if I were to do the math on how much time I spend researching and
Mm,
writing and revising and
totally.
thinking about a book in the shower, um, if you took my advance and like took out my agent's cut and taxes, I'm probably clearing like $3 an hour.
Oh, that is definitely the life of a writer. That's so funny.
So, well, okay, I love this. It is wonderful that you found a way, this incredible way to use your innate skills and to be constantly growing them and
Mm,
stretching them, I might
mm.
add, um, to create this company that allows people for whom writing is not a
Yeah.
thing that comes easily and joyfully to become easy and joyful,
Mm.
or at least like a satisfying challenge, and to occupy that like really good flow space, right? Where it's just enough struggle, but not too much.
Right.
So, okay. So where we left off last week in the history of Brave Writer, we had sort of gotten up to you're now offering classes on an online platform. What happens next in the growth of the company to these three arms of the publishing arm with the arrow and the other products that you created, and then the robust slate of online classes with all these teachers that you're training to deliver like the very special, unique Brave Writer experience, and the membership community?
Oh, that's such a great question. So the product line kept growing. We have a big joke in Brave Writer that you can trace every product back to one of my kids playing a sport. So I remember when my son Noah wanted to play lacrosse and it was going to cost $500. And I'm like, okay, what else do people need in writing so
That
that
is
I
the
can
most homeschooling mom story I've ever heard.
so, so that happened for a number of years, and within that space, we had this sort of tripod of ideas around writing. So some of you will recognize that the Writer's Jungle, which became Growing Brave Writers, is the spine. It's the main manual. And then we have these literature products, the quill, dart, arrow, boomerang, and slingshot. Originally, we just had arrow and slingshot, then we added boomerang, then we added dart and quill. Like we've added layers over the years. But that product line evolved as a product line. And then we needed writing projects, these assignments that you could do with your child that bring together the technical grammar skills with the original thinking, the original writing. And those are the jot it down, partnership writing, building confidence, and help for high school programs. And of course, they all came at kind of an unsteady pace. It was all mommy time and eventually divorced mother time, right? Like it just, and the thing is, I knew to duplicate myself for teaching classes. That seemed really obvious. It took me longer to realize I needed to duplicate myself for writing. And then once that happened, everything flourished and grew very rapidly. The online classes, I started with just hiring friends, and I still have one friend working for us. Suzanne Barrett is my longest running employee now. She started in like 2002. But mostly we did these calls to hire, and people would apply, and we would take them through literally a 3-month process before we decided to hire them because I was such a stickler for training. And today we've kind of streamlined that process a bit. One of our teachers became our director, and that's Kirsten Merriman. I remember at a certain point realizing I couldn't design every class that we taught. I did that for a while. I created everyone from scratch. And there was a moment where we realized our teachers are really smart. And Kirsten reached out and said, I have an idea for a class. And I said, oh, go ahead and give me a raw outline. She handed back a 4-week completely written class.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And I was like, oh, this is a woman with some talent that is really innate. And today she runs the entire program, and she has streamlined and shaped and just made everything we do so much better. I mean, the truth is, every person I've hired is better at what they do than I was doing it. I had the vision. I started the ball rolling. I wrote things, and then I brought in people who were better and smarter than me, and they made things even better and more amazing. And that includes you, Melissa Wiley.
Oh, shucks.
No, and honestly, I think if anyone's out there like trying to start a little business, the biggest advice I would give you if you're a CEO is let go of your ego and hire people who are better than you. Hire the people who can take your vision and really bring it to another level. Because the gift of a CEO is the vision. And it might even be, in our case, the pedagogy. But what I really need are people who can execute at a really high level. And when I was doing the 3-ring circus all by myself, it was a lot. It was a lot to do well, right?
It seems like it would be impossible to be writing those. I know how much work goes into writing a single class. And then I know how much work goes into teaching a Brave Writer class. All of those individualized responses on every piece of writing every student does. It's a lot.
It's a ton of work. And then you have to do the marketing. And so for me, the one task I haven't ever fully delegated is marketing. I mean, we have a lot of people who work on, the HubSpot emails and the graphics and the website and all that. I'm not saying I do all that, but generating the copy and the slogans and the ideas and the push, that has always been on my shoulders. It never goes away. But I don't mind that. That part I feel like is kind of a CEO responsibility. When you asked about the membership community, that came about in 2014 because I wanted professional development for homeschoolers. The feedback I was constantly getting was that home educators felt like they weren't doing enough and didn't know if they were doing it well. And I felt like we were just hearing this echo chamber of each other. And I was so used to drawing on resources from actual educators, teachers, child psychologists, people who had expertise in areas that weren't necessarily homeschool related, but that were parenting, child development, and education related. And so I wanted to create a space where we could, almost like a college class, I would assign a reading, and then we would have a webinar and talk about it. And in some cases, I would invite in the speaker who had written that piece to be a person that could talk to us. So that was the origin of that. We used to call it the Homeschool Alliance. Today, it's Brave Learner Home. But those were the 3 things I felt we needed. We needed classes, we needed product, and we needed a membership community. And we developed them.
I think you were the first person I ever heard who talked about professional development for homeschooling parents. And I think that is such an important piece of what you have brought, because when you speak to people on Instagram, right, in a video or in a webinar or back in the Periscope days, I mean, you rocked Periscope from the very first moment. You're speaking like in that role as homeschooling mom with experience, who's interested in pedagogy and philosophy and theory, and who loves to learn.
Yeah.
And encouraging other parents to see that learning as part of not just something they get to do, but something like they deserve to be able to do.
Oh, deserve is the exact right word. I know for me, I remember when I moved to Morocco, I was 23 years old. And the only 2 recipes I knew when I got married were how to make a salad and how to stir fry vegetables. Like that was it. I was out after 2 meals. And I remember I bought a Fanny Farmer cookbook, and then I moved to Morocco. And I also had the More with Less cookbook, which is a Mennonite cookbook, which was really great. And everything in Morocco had to be made from scratch. There were no go and buy a box mix of anything. And so I was and even things like when you would buy your chicken, it was a living chicken. They killed it in front of you, defeathered it, and handed it to you warm and whole.
Wow.
And so I had to learn how to cut a chicken correctly, how to take out the innards, all that stuff. And what I remember feeling when I first started was just absolutely overwhelmed. I don't know how to do any of this. I didn't know how to make bread. I didn't know how to clean my house. I didn't know how to cook. And what I realized was it was okay to be taught, to read the book, to have my landlady show me how to make bread, to have somebody show me how to clean floors. Like, the more that I gained the skills, the less incompetent and stupid I felt. But I had to like be deliberate about it. I had to actually like schedule a whole morning to go buy the chicken, to bring it home, to hack it incorrectly, to realize I had the wrong knife. You know, there has to be like trial and error built in with time, with professional training, even if it's coming from a book, which back then we didn't have the internet. So today, what I think has happened is there's been this compression. We have so much information available that we spend more time looking at the information than taking the time to practice the thing that we're being asked to do. And
for sure.
Yes, my view is pick one thing, read about it, watch a video, whatever, and then actually devote yourself to doing it. Don't do anything else until you've done it. That for me that could explain everything about my company, and it explains everything about how I homeschooled and just how I grew as a person. Just one little thing at a time, immersing and then doing, immersing and then doing.
Julie, that is so important. And it strikes me that because of the moment in time when you were acquiring those skills for cooking and cleaning, you were learning from a book you mentioned, and you were learning from women in your community.
Yep.
And what we have today, I haven't ever really thought about this, but right now we see all these videos of competency.
Yes.
And it can be so intimidating because you feel like the gulf between, we're not seeing process as much. You see the finished competency where skills have been acquired and now they're being portrayed, demonstrated, like almost shown off.
Exactly.
Even if unintentionally.
Right.
Rather than the messy, this is how we do it, the trial and error, the making mistakes. I mean, I think that's the way that women learned all of our household skills for centuries and millennia.
Yes.
In community.
Totally.
And I mean, the way that humans learned all skills, right? Like carpentry and well digging.
100%. My daughter, Katrin, who is my youngest, so she's 28, she said that her generation goes on YouTube to find out how to do something, and then they get down the rabbit hole of which YouTube does the best job and of showing it. And by the time they find what they think is the best, they've used up all the time they could have used to do the thing, and then they never do the thing. So it's this endless quest for the best example of the thing they want to do, like making a pie crust. And then they never make the pie crust because by the time they've found it, an hour and a half has gone by and they've lost the will to even try. And so
that is so true.
Yeah, she has this rule that you watch one video and you try right away, right? Like you just for yourself, you just take as much information as you're given and you try for yourself. And honestly, in the context of this 25th anniversary, the thing that I would want to say the most about homeschooling, about writing instruction, about growing as an adult woman is that just try. It can fall flat. I've had products fail. I've had times when I've made a decision that later I'm like, why did I spend all this money on that piece of, technology that we barely used and didn't do the job? But we don't know if we don't try. It's the only way to find out, And so even with our kids, if we're at home and we have this hunch, I want to do dictation, there isn't a best way. There's a way that you can do it. And then the more you do it with your kids, the more you're going to learn what works and what doesn't. And so, yes, professional development for me is just this notion that you deserve to learn the skills and you can learn them one at a time and you don't have to scroll through 25 YouTubes to get there. Take what you learned and try it out. Happy New Year. Let's take a minute to take a look at what's happening in Brave Writer in the beginning of 2025. First of all, I am super pumped. I have a brand new book coming out in April. That is my 4th book with Tarcher Perigee, and this one is called Help! My Kid Hates Writing. And I'm really hoping that this book sort of distills the principles you need to help that struggling student become a brave writer. Cover reveal is on Instagram and will also be in an email coming to an inbox near you soon. Thanks for supporting my writing over the years, and I really hope that this book meets a need that you have. Secondly, we have launched a brand new venture on Substack called Brave Learning with Julie Bogart. Many of you have asked me to get on Substack, and we finally got it put together. The very first series of posts is focused on that re-upping energy you need for the new year in your homeschool. You can subscribe by heading to the link in our show notes. This Substack will also include our weekly free writing prompts for your kids. And then I'm hoping that you will share some of those free writes in the comments section so that you can start reading the work of your own children and other children. We will also focus on themes related to parenting and awesome adulting in addition to education and writing. And there will be weekly links or reminders to tune into this podcast. Some of the content will be public and free, but if you like to be a commenter or you want access to all the content, please consider subscribing. It helps support Brave Writer when you do, and I'm very much looking forward to developing a sense of community over there. And then third and last, our winter-spring classes are open for registration. Some sessions are already sold out. That's always what happens in December, but there are plenty more with openings. If you'd like to have support in teaching writing as we kick off 2025, sign up for one of our award-winning writing classes now. See the link in our show notes for registration information. Above all, thank you for supporting Brave Writer, for supporting the work I do. You make it possible for us to keep providing you with what you need to feel good about your homeschool. And now let's go back to the podcast.
I love this. I like that our conversation has gone here. I think when we were learning things from books, they're a little bit less seductive than videos.
Yeah.
You get your one book and you read it and then you try it, and that. But I never really noticed that the space between reading about and just giving it a shot was shorter. Yes.
Well, also because you're alone. Like I remember the first time I made yogurt. Yogurt is a little more finicky than a recipe in a cookbook. And I was living in a completely cement tiled apartment. So freezing cold. It's very cold in the winter. And my yogurt just kept not gelling. And it had to have a warmer environment, but I had no heaters. I had a space heater, but there's no centralized heat in these apartments in Morocco. And I finally realized I needed to take a lambskin and wrap it in a blanket and a lambskin and put it in a corner that was somewhat near where the space heater was to get this yogurt to work. And I remember being so proud of this ability to create warmth because I was starting to understand what it took for yogurt cultures to grow. Some of the invention that you come to is because even the instructions you're given are not adequate to your circumstances. And so having the sense of expansiveness in yourself, that you're not in a hurry, you're not in a race, there's no destination you need to get to. You're just in this creative problem solving mode. That is the most exciting mental space to live in. And for me, my business has just been an endless problem solving mode. That's kind of why I love it. I'm constantly confronted with new questions. And I think if we all embrace that in home education, in whatever our aspirations are, you end up getting to have a richer, deeper, more satisfying experience of being alive.
It's true. Those side quests in gaming terminology, the side quests can be the most fun part of the game. The big boss battles are the scary part, right? Where the stakes are so high.
Yeah.
But if you have kids who play games, you should ask your kids, what do you like best? The side quests where you're just the stakes were not that high with the yogurt experiment. No. And matter to you that just because the stakes aren't that high doesn't mean they're not meaningful.
Right.
And I think that is something that Brave Writer pedagogy really captures is that you give kids meaningful ways to express themselves in writing
Yes.
all these different types of experiences, all these different means of expression, but the stakes are not so high. There's not like this, your future is riding on it or
Right.
public embarrassment. It's iterative, it's experimental and experiential. So for me, that's like really the strength and I think it starts with that, like the line, Julie, between you making yogurt and a kid in a Brave Writer class today.
Oh
I
my
think that's a
gosh.
really fun thread to follow.
I love that.
When I think about, okay, I think all of us living in 2025, we have a before the pandemic and after the
Yes.
pandemic mentality. So I'd love to talk a little bit about like the pandemic effect. How did that hit Brave Writer?
Well, so what's really interesting is Brave Writer like earned more money every single year of its existence from 2000 to 2020. Except the year that I got divorced, we only increased by $10. My tax accountant was like, the good news is you made more money this year than last year. The bad news is it was $10. So that was amazing. But 2020 took us by surprise. It was our 20th anniversary as a company. So we were preparing this big surprise. We were going to offer Brave Learner Home for free if you bought one of our complete programs. And we knew that was coming, but we didn't know the pandemic was coming. So what ended up happening is when March hit and we had this lockdown, I reached out to Susan Weiss Bauer and I said, Susan, everybody and their uncle wants to homeschool, has to homeschool right now. We should put on a conference. And here's literally what she said to me. She said, you organize it. I'll pay for it. Here are the people I'll contribute. You contribute whoever you want. We'll send it to both our email lists. Like it was the best collaboration I've ever done in my life. I hosted it on my platform. And anyway, we put together this week-long 5-day conference that went from noon until 10 p.m. every night. And we had 2,000 people a day taking these classes from us, preparing them in all the ways that we could. And then we had this sale in June, and Brave Writer tripled in revenue that year. We were like, or doubled in revenue, I guess it was. And we were like in shock. Like we did not see it coming. Every day was just drowning. We were just trying to keep our heads above water to keep up with demand. And so the pandemic was this opportunity really for us to showcase who Brave Writer is to a whole wide range of public school parents who didn't even know what homeschooling was and who had this
Right.
brand new way to understand writing. And some of that left like fabulous impressions on families who even put their kids back in school. They had this like opportunity in this very safe context to experiment because there was no other option. They're like, nobody
Right.
could get mad at me. So I can experiment. It very much goes with what we're talking about right now. Like if we could all return to that feeling where it was safe to experiment because there is no other option, I think we would get so much further. So yeah, the pandemic like accelerated our growth. Now, after the pandemic, you know, the tide came out, the tide went back in, right? So it kind of shrunk a little bit, and that's very normal because homeschooling has changed and evolved. But that was a really big watershed year for us and really an exciting time. My book, The Brave Learner, had just come out in 2019. And in 2020, it like returned to really high sales and a massive reach that we didn't expect. And so very fun, despite it being a terrifying time for us all publicly, for Brave Writer, it was kind of an exciting time.
I wanted to talk about your book. Boy, 2019, that is such great timing because then then it traveled beyond the already homeschooling community.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
To a much broader audience, which was fantastic. A lot of people, I mean, I saw people in totally different circles of the internet talking about the Brave Learner.
Wow.
Was very, very cool to see all of these ideas that, you know, I felt like here as homeschoolers, we have this almost this like too good to be true secret of like, oh no, you can have a lot of fun like living with your kids and learning with them. And it was really fun to see that rippling out to the world. So talk about your books. How did The Brave Learner when did it enter the picture? Why did you decide to go the traditional publishing route? Because here you had this company that had a publishing arm. You could have
Yeah.
gone that route.
Oh my gosh. What's really funny is many of you know my mother has written 72 books and she's sold over 2 million copies of the books she's written over the years. Partly because her devotional book that she wrote called Getting Old Ain't for Wimps, ironically, became a giveaway when you subscribed to Guideposts. And Guideposts is a huge magazine. So that was like this massive conquering, 500,000 copies were sold through that experience.
Wow.
Yeah, so she's really had a delightful career. But I have also watched many of her books go into remainders. And in the publishing world, remainders means they didn't sell enough copies to stay in print. So you'd have it out for 2 years and then they're like, oh, we're done. And then they're like, would you like to buy the leftover books that are in our warehouse? Because we're not selling it anymore.
It costs them more money to keep the stock in the warehouse than to just throw the books away.
Exactly. And
painful.
It's very painful. And I watched my mom go through that countless times, right? 70 books. So I had this belief in my brain that the only reason to get traditionally published is if I knew people were going to read it. I didn't really care about a physical book. Like I had seen my mom getting books in the mail for years that were physical books. I didn't have a romantic notion about that. That wasn't like a goal for me to hold a book in my hand. Like, okay, books are books. They're everywhere. Most books never get read. Like I was just the only thing I cared about. I have two things I care about when I write, and that is that people actually read them to the end, that they buy it and read it to the end, or they access it and read it to the end. That's it. I just want my books to be read. And if they're not interesting enough to hold your attention, then why am I writing? What a pointless task. So my kids tease me that I started a company so that I could eventually get traditionally published because I was determined to find out if I had an audience for my ideas before I went to the work of writing a book and getting an agent and trying to pitch it. And so that really is what was different about my approach to getting published. I wasn't interested in being published for its own sake. I wanted to find out if there were people who'd want to even read something I'd bother to write. And by the time I was doing Periscope, it became abundantly clear to me that the ideas I was expressing were not in any books. They weren't in the kind of books that I wanted to recommend for homeschoolers. So I reached out to my mom and I said, hey, Mom, should I reach out to your agent, and see if she wants to represent me? And she said, oh, she won't want to represent you. You don't write in the right space. I said, shoot, I wanted a shortcut. So, but I called her agent. We had a nice chat, but no, she didn't want to represent me. So then my mom said, Julie, you should just go to the Writer's Digest conference. They have a pitch slam and you can maybe find an agent that way. So I went the really old school route. I paid money. I went to New York. I stayed at the Hilton. I prepared a pitch. I had help from a professional pitch writer who met me there and we rehearsed it over and over. And then I went to the conference. Kwame Alexander and Emily St. John Mandel were the two keynote speakers.
Oh my
and David
gosh.
Baldacci. I mean, it was amazing.
Come on.
Yeah, it was amazing. I got to meet Kwame. I got to talk to Emily. I mean, it was amazing. And then I went in the pitch slam and I had, studied the agents in advance and I knew who I wanted to be my agent. So I got in her little line and I got all the way up to her and she's this very smart Brooklyn literary agent with just like the glasses, the face, like she's just exactly what you would picture. And I spit out my little pitch and I handed her a one sheet I had made for the event. And what you're waiting for is for them to hand you their business card. That means they're interested. And she did not break a smile. And then all of a sudden she just reached over and handed me her card and said, I look forward to hearing from you. And I was like,
wow.
And she became my agent and got me an amazing deal with Charcher Perigee. It was the first time that they've ever considered a homeschooling book. And it was before the pandemic, which is amazing. Right. They didn't have a lot of faith in it. They wouldn't publish it in hardback because they weren't sure it would sell out the advance, which was not very big. And now I'm like, you guys should have done the hardback. It's like 87,000 copies and, it's done quite well. So that's how I started. And honestly, what's been so thrilling is that people seem to like it. They wanted to keep reading it. And that's all I really cared about. So that's how I started my traditional publishing career.
It's very fun that because Tarcher Perigee is a Random House imprint, and
Yes.
I published with both Knopf, which is another Random House imprint, and Random House. Like we're
In the same
publishing house
family.
sisters.
I know. And for those who don't know, it's kind of a big deal to write for one of the big five publishers. For me, that felt like such a deep validation of my own writing skills. And I think you always live in fear that you're a bit of a fraud anytime you venture out into the world to put out your skill set. You're like, but am I good at this? Am I delusional?
It's really interesting with writing, especially because you're asking for people's focused attention.
Yes.
And especially since it's getting harder for people to give focused attention to the written word. Like I do feel like sometimes it's a big ask. Please read me.
No, it is. And when I wrote The Brave Learner, I was so in my wheelhouse. I was writing about all the things that everybody expects of me. When I wrote Raising Critical Thinkers, I had two funny reactions to the first draft, or the first idea of it, actually, from my mother and from my boyfriend. They were both like, oh, well, your second book might not be as interesting as your first, but that's okay. And I was like, wait, what? And they're like, critical thinking, it's so abstract, and I was like, okay, game on. I am going to write the best opening that will be irresistible. And of course, then I just thought, what is an irresistible opening for a critical thinking book? And I was like, I know, sex.
That is hilarious. That was a response to a challenge. Well,
It was.
mission accomplished. A very spicy opening, and it ropes you right in. Good opening hook. Julie Brave writer.
When my mom read the book, she's like, wow, it held my interest the whole way. And I was like, yes, I did it. I achieved my goal. So,
oh, I love that. That's funny because that's the sort of feedback you often get when you write for the middle grade audience. And they write you fan letters and they say, I read the whole thing.
I love that. I love that. And today, reading is a struggle. They're saying, I remember in the Atlantic Monthly, it was saying, this one article was saying that incoming freshmen to college, many of them have never read a full book. Never read a full book. They're used to reading chunks of text, but not like cover to cover. And they read things out of order. They'll like scan a table of contents and read one chapter. And I was realizing this. I don't like to criticize technology. That's never been my thing. But I'm trying to understand, like, well, what does that mean about us? And what does that mean about the future of writing and communication? And how is artificial intelligence going to influence all that? I wish I was going to live for another 50 years because I'd really like to go on that ride and I'd like to shape that conversation. But mostly I'm just curious about it.
Well, it does go back to what you were saying earlier about how we can't predict, we can't be trying to train kids now for jobs that exist now because we don't know what jobs are going to look like in 20 years when they're in the market, in the job market.
That's right.
But what we can do is help light the fire of their interest, make writing fun and enjoyable, make reading fun and enjoyable.
Yes.
And I think that that's one of the other big strengths of Brave Writer is it's not divorced from great books, like really good, engaging books. I know that Dawn Smith, your director of publishing, my beloved editor, works so hard to curate these book lists that are, I mean, that's a big, difficult job.
It's the biggest and worst job. And yet she does it so well and enjoys it to some extent. I mean, it's also challenging. But yes, you're right. I mean, that is one of the planks of Brave Writer is to develop readers and writers. And it's something that we can be intentional about. It's like saying, I want my kid to be interested in physical activity. Well, how do you do that? you don't do that just by sitting on the couch. You deliberately go on walks. You deliberately put them in sports. You deliberately
Right.
play backyard games. You can do the same thing with reading and writing.
That's right. And having that shared reading experience of, a program that's built around read alouds.
Yes,
Um,
right.
then you've got all this commonality, all this language and interest, and you're doing projects. And I don't know. I just, before we started recording, was reading the Moomins, one of the Moomins books with my almost 16-year-old and 18-year-old. We're still doing read alouds,
Oh,
Julie.
I love this. I love it.
And
Well, and just last week, over the Thanksgiving holiday, well, we're recording this in December, but anyway, over the Thanksgiving holiday, I look up and there's my daughter Johanna holding open a read aloud, and all three grandchildren are just sitting in front of her on their knees, completely enraptured. And then my other daughter in law, she told me she's reading her first chapter book to my 4-year-old child, and it's Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
oh,
And I just love knowing that that's what's happening for the next generation, right? That
right.
that is still sacred. And so, yeah, we can give that to our children.
Oh, love that. Well, I wanted to ask you if you have any favorite, like, highlight moments, high point stories you want to share, and also any like major hiccups or challenges, lessons learned that you
Well,
want to share.
I'm going to start with the funny lessons learned that also is like a high point. So I remember in 2008, my husband at the time and I were deciding that this little discussion board that we were using to teach classes was starting to feel inadequate for the volume of students that we were getting. And we were still using email to sign up and PayPal to pay. And my classes were filling in 30 seconds because the volume of people who wanted them outpaced the number of classes I could offer. And so then we'd have these waiting lists. It was just getting very cumbersome. So we started looking around for a platform that we could use. And back then there was a platform called Moodle, and it was Canadian, it was open source, and they could build it to be a custom design classroom. And I remember at the time the price was going to be like $7,000 or $8,000. And I was like, oh no, that is super expensive. I can't afford to do that. So we ended up not doing it. The next year, I discovered while I was looking at other websites for homeschool that there was this organization, a developer team in North Carolina called Terralian. It's gone now. And I loved what they produced for this other homeschool provider. And so I reached out to them and I said, I'm kind of looking to build something for a classroom for this purpose. And I said, would you guys be interested? And they were like, oh, for sure. So they laid out all the specs and then they gave me a sticker price and it was like $35,000. And I was like, oh my gosh. But here's the crazy thing. They were so persuasive and what they wanted to build made so much sense to me. So I said yes, even though we did not have any of the funds. I was going to have to pay it over time. And then I got a divorce. So I was literally suddenly going to be a single income. I had a kid going to college. I had this loan that I had just taken out, and I had to pay for a divorce all in the same year. And I'm sharing this very transparently because, people don't know what it's like to run a company, but that is exactly what it's like. And I ended up somehow just growing and managing to pay off all of those things over the next couple of years. It only took me like 2 or 3 years to pay off all of that sort of loan debt. It was the first time and only time I've ever taken out a loan for Brave Writer. But that is the classroom that you're in today when you come, and think of how many years that has served us. It's been
Wow.
14 years and we refine it all the time. But I am so proud of that software. It is such a beautiful platform and it is so effective for what we teach. And so I'm very proud of it. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but it ended up being one of the best.
Well, I have experienced both sides of that platform because I have taught classes in it, and my son took a class just this past semester, and it is such a great. I mean, gosh, I'm a tech nerd too, and I have played with a lot of platforms over the years. It's a good experience. The user experience, so it was worth all that struggle, Julie.
I
For
no,
sure.
I really believe it. Now, I do want to tell a story. Just while you were sitting there, I was like, here's a story I have not told. And I think now's the time to tell it. And I've wanted to tell it for a while. This is the thing we can tease for this episode.
Julie spills the dirt.
I've had to hold on to it for a long time because I never wanted to cause any damage to another company. But I was the victim of a malicious lawsuit the same year that The Brave Learner came out. So in 2019. And this malicious lawsuit was from a homeschool company that we worked with. They resold our curriculum at a discount. And at the time, the guy who sued us was not paying us what we were owed. And I was saying, okay, we have to withdraw our products and no longer work with you. And this guy was kind of a new owner. The original owner was fabulous, good friend of mine still to this day, but the new owner turned out to not be a very good person. So he turned around and sued us and said that we weren't allowed to email any of the customers that we had gotten through this business, even though I had that as an agreement with the previous owner.
Yikes.
And this lawsuit found itself in the Southern District of New York.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh. My dad, who's a lawyer, I'm like calling him every week. Okay, what do I do now? And I had to hire like a high-powered law firm. It cost us an absolute fortune to defend ourselves. In the end, we did win our version of the lawsuit, but there was a chance that he was going to refile in California. And so we were trying to decide, do we go ahead and file before he does and sue him for the money he owed me? He owed me like $35,000, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah. And this lawsuit cost us over $100,000. It was a very upsetting experience all the way around. But it all kind of came to a head right as the pandemic broke out. And so my lawyer said to me, you know what, Julie, don't worry about him right now. Any court is going to take a dim view of a guy who does a lawsuit like this at the start of the pandemic. So let's wait him out and see what happens. Well, he didn't refile. So that was great. But what we discovered just a year later is that he went and set up 3 fraudulent companies where he created false driver's license, false people to populate, and he scammed $9 million of PPP loan money.
Get out.
Yeah, from the country, and was discovered. He took that money and bought a house and invested it in the stock market. And he had this huge list of felonies. He was going to be locked away like forever. And so when I found that out, I was like, okay, so he was a bad guy. It really was a malicious lawsuit. You know, I lived 1,000 deaths during that period. I was going through hundreds and hundreds of emails trying to prove my case. It was a nightmare. And then just a few months later, he committed suicide.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a pretty dark turn, doesn't it?
It does. It does.
Yeah. And the thing that was so staggering about the whole experience was the feeling of vulnerability, right? I had spent a lot of time trusting any colleague I developed in business in homeschool because most people are incredibly ethical. But what turned out to happen is this guy wasn't. And I did not have like contracts perfectly articulated. I didn't have practices perfectly articulated when we transferred over to a new owner. And I got nailed. And it was a scam lawsuit. He was just trying to hold off creditors, and I didn't know that. So,
Wow.
you know, for those of you who are romanticizing business,
Yeah,
just
seriously.
know that you don't know what you don't know. So get lawyers early, always have contracts in place, understand what those contracts mean. Sometimes your employees don't understand the contracts they're signing, and then later they're shocked when you say this is in your contract. Like all of that stuff was a massive learning curve for me. So if you're in business, just be careful out there. It's always good to double check everything, and have paying lawyers will save you so much grief.
Right, right. Gosh, it's such a contrast between the low stakes learning of making yogurt and writing a good opening hook.
Oh my gosh. No, I remember my boyfriend's a lawyer too. And he's like, gosh, I really thought that your job was the one place where you would not be subjected to any kind of lawsuit. And I'm like, I think when you hit a certain income threshold, you're just vulnerable and you have to be careful.
Well, I am glad you were tenacious and
It's a crazy story. It was a really,
yeah,
really crazy year, really hard year. And a
right.
lot was going on at the same time that made it difficult. But then at the same time, my book was released. We had a great conference, right? And that's kind of life, isn't it? You have
Yeah,
these really big, happy things happening simultaneous with risky, scary things. And that's all part of it.
right, right. Wow. Okay, I'm going to ask you no, this is maybe my favorite question in an interview, which is, what didn't I ask that you wish I had?
Well, the one thing you asked that I didn't answer was what was a highlight? And I will say that the conference in 2019 was a huge highlight for me. It was something I sort of had always dreamed of, right? Doing this conference that was exactly the way I wanted it, that was in a fancy ballroom that looked almost like a wedding, it was at that level. And it was this massive celebration of all the people who had contributed to my pedagogy, to my worldview. It was fun to have Dottie Christensen there, my best buddy in homeschooling. It was
Mhm.
great to have my mother there, which I still just cherish in my heart. So that was a big highlight. Another one for me is very recent. It was exciting to be honored last year at the National Association of Women's Business Owners as a top 10 business in the country, a woman-owned business. That was a huge achievement. I feel proud of the fact that so many families have written to me personally to thank me. I mean, the number of kind messages that people take the time to put into language to let me know that the work our company has done in their lives has made a difference. I can't even tell you how much that means to me. It's the most touching result of this kind of work is to get to know that it made a difference. And then the friendships I've built with people like you, with my staff. There are various homeschool moms that I've become close to over the years. So there's this feeling of like, I got to live my purpose and I got to know that it mattered. And I wish that for everyone. That feels really wonderful at this stage of my life.
Oh, wow, Julie. Now I'm going to cry.
Oh,
Mm. I'm really happy to have been on so many parts of this ride
I
with
know.
you.
It's amazing.
um, so many iterations. Oh, gosh. But also just to watch the way that you move in the world is such a treat. And it's enthusiasm is my favorite thing, right? Like that's just like Scott says, that's my superpower is infectious enthusiasm. And I feel like you're
Agreed.
this, I feel like you are this, like you have this energy, this enthusiasm and zest for life and learning that I just watch how it spills out over all these families and it really does change lives. So I
Thank
know
you.
our listeners are probably like, stop gushing, Lissa, but I can't help it.
It's so nice. No, I knew that you were the right person for this podcast. And every time we meet, it is such a joy. I feel like we get to just be friends on the air. I
It's
think,
true.
that's what's fun about Brave Writer. Like every part of it is fun for me. I taught the Taylor Swift class with Laura Stiller this summer.
Oh,
And then
yeah.
she came to my little conference here in Cincinnati. And like, I just feel like I'm so lucky to get to hang out with such cool people all the time. My staff is incredible. Cindy and I have such a neat relationship, and we've known each other for so long and through so many iterations of the company. So, yeah, Brave Writer did not start out like this. It was tiny. It was a one woman operation. And then very quickly I hired someone and now it's like a company, but it took time. It's iterative. If you're like at the beginning stages, just know that it's okay for it to be small. There are times when I deliberately kept it small. I liked that it was
Right.
part-time and that I was fully invested in my children. I don't have any regrets about how I treated my family during those years because I was invested in them. I actually had time for them. So that's a good feeling.
Right. It bubbled out of what you were doing with them.
Yes.
and then you shared that with other families. I'm thinking about something we talked about in part one of this conversation. We laughed about how in the very, very early days of the Arrow, when it was an email that you would write and it would show up in somebody's like Yahoo mail. Um, um, there were times where you would, in the section that was like notes, what to note about this passage, there were times that you were like, there's nothing of note. Because at that time, what that was a help for moms who were trying to get their heads around how to do copy work. And that was what it needed to be at that point in time for the people who were using it. And then as it reaches more and more people and you're receptive to feedback and hearing what people need, and you iterate and you iterate and it grows into something. And I've seen that happen. It's exciting.
I love that so much. What a great way to put it. And in fact, it's kind of an interesting segue because here we are in January 2025, and we are launching Brave Learning with Julie Bogart on Substack, which is a weekly email and probably will grow into more than that. But it will be the sort of culmination of all these lessons, all these ideas that will give you something to grow on, right? And a place to chat about it. And so I think one of the most beautiful things about the internet is the way the platforms keep evolving to offer different experiences of content. And I'm hoping that this one will be really lovely. We'll include a link in case you want to subscribe, but I feel very eager for that to get off the ground. I already am filled like with you were going to ask me about like, well, what's the future? Well, one of my future visions is for this Substack to kind of take off. And I have some ideas that could include some student writing as well, and just to create yet another way for you to engage the material, but a little more long form. We started this conversation by talking about long form writing. And I do think there is something to that if we can start to retrain ourselves to engage with content that's longer than 144 characters, we will actually see some growth. And I think it will be really satisfying to you.
I love that you're thinking in that direction, because that is such a worthy endeavor. All of us remember, I think everybody listening to this podcast remembers times when they have been caught up in the written word, whether it was nonfiction or fiction, or an article that you read that changed your life, right?
Yep.
I know that we all have a sort of nostalgia and have to, because we find it takes more work now.
That's right.
Than it used to.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely right. And then the other thing that's coming on the horizon, and we will have a book cover reveal for it in the coming weeks in January. I have a new book coming out, and this is the one that they've been asking me to write. And I kept saying no because Brave Writer has all this curricula and I felt like it was redundant. But finally, I was persuaded that writing a book for parents whose kids really struggle with writing was important, not just for homeschoolers, but for parents of kids in school. And so I've written a book called Help, My Kid Hates Writing. And it's really for those kids who are just, I don't want to write. Now, will parents with kids who like writing benefit? 1,000%. Basically, this book is just the distillation of 25 years of pedagogical growth in the field of writing. And it reads like a book. It's not curriculum like Growing Brave Writers is, but you might find that it really enhances and enriches how you understand the implementation of anything that we've produced as curriculum. It's the kind of thing that I hope you'll like buy the audiobook and listen to, or if you buy the hardback, you'll mark it up with Post-it notes, right? Like that's what I'm hoping, that it will really help you ground yourself in the pedagogy and feel confident going forward.
I think it is going to be such a rich resource for families. I'm laughing because there's this picture of my daughter when she was maybe 8 years old, and she's pretending to be me while I'm writing.
Oh, wow.
And she's got this pained expression on her face. I was like, is that what I look like when I'm working? She said, it looks like it hurts sometimes, Mom. So
that is so funny that you bring that up, because Johanna she told me this much later. She wrote an entire book just so that she could print it and walk around the house with a pen editing it like me. She had like 100 printed pages. She's like, I had to write a really long one so I could have a whole stack of paper. So isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
So I think it's going to be a fantastic resource so that your kids don't have to have that face that I apparently make when I'm doing my life's work.
But no, on the other hand, think about how that's caught, right? And that is part of the message of this book. Writing is a birthright. It is certainly not something that should be seen as this extra task that you have to learn because school said so.
Right.
It should actually be that your daughter wants to have that paint expression because she can tell that the writing you're doing is meaningful and matters. Right. And that's why she's imitating you. And so, yeah, I really look forward to the breakthroughs. There's new material in there, things that doesn't exist in any of the other curriculum, and lots of storytelling. And I really challenge myself to make it interesting to read. So hopefully I've hit that mark. But yeah, I'm excited that that's coming out in April, and we have some new offerings in Brave Writer, but we'll let those roll out over the year. And we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary all year. Thank you, Melissa.
Well, Julie, thank you for taking us on this walk through a really rich chapter of history.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you for listening. And I really appreciate the audience of this podcast. You guys send us notes. It's so sweet. And we love hearing from you. And if you have topics that you would like us to use in the future, please use our text messaging phone number, which we always include a link to in the show notes. We actually have a spreadsheet that Melissa monitors, and then we actually take some of those topics for future episodes. So thank you for being here. Thank you, Melissa, for those beautiful questions, and happy anniversary to all of us.
Yay!
You've been listening to the Brave Writer podcast. I'm Julie Bogart, and Melissa Wiley is my co-host. This podcast is produced by Nova Media with support from team member Jeanette Hall. Thank you for listening and for leaving either a starred or written review on the podcast app of your choice. Anytime you do that, you bring a lot of joy to the team and you support our work. So thanks in advance.